Section 6 of the American Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Smith. The American Egypt by Channing Arnold and Frederick J. Tabor Frost. Section 6. First Impressions of Yucatan. A sea of greengage green, broken by scarce a ripple save where a shark's fin curves up shiny black in the blazing sun. A semicircle of pale sand, fringed by brown and mahogany red boarded barns of warehouses, with here and there a gaunt brick chimney, a thin belt of palm trees, 3 wooden jetties, and beyond, houses stuccoed white and salmon pink. This is our first sight of Yucatan's only port, Progreso. There is no harbor, for the shallows stretch far seaward, and steamers of any draught dare not come within 5 miles of the coast. The outward and visible signs of the town have scarcely come distinctly into view, and we have barely lost sight in the heat mist of the monster form of our liner, anchored miles in our wake, when the panting tug has come alongside the pier, and we are for the first time face to face with Yucatans. A Yucatan crowd is a pleasant sight to look upon. Personal cleanliness, bright-collared vests, and spotless linen breeches are a welcome change for the traveler who comes from a Mexican port. The Yucatan and the Mexican, too, are physically very unlike, and the difference is all in favor of the former. The crowd which awaits the tug is a bright, clean-faced, orderly crowd, and as we step ashore, the luggage touts, many of them remarkably intelligent-looking and handsome fellows, take your "No, muchas gracias" for an answer, which is more than you can say for the evil-smelling, vulture-faced, blackmailing gang who throng the quays at such ports as Vera Cruz and Tampico. Alas, months of sojourn in the land of the Mayans are to alter the first favorable impressions of that Progreso crowd. Verily are Yucatans whited sepulchres. And here perhaps it would be as well to define a Yucatan. The population of Yucatan, speaking broadly, consists of 2 classes, slaves and savages. The former are the Indians, by centuries of brutally degraded and robbed of that spirit which made them foes worthy of Cortez's prowess, but still a kindly, hospitable people, for whom every English heart must feel a keen sympathy. The savages are the Yucatans, the mongrel people resulting from the early unions of the Spanish with the Indian women, and if the epithet seems harsh, we would ask our readers to reserve judgment till they have finished this volume. The tint of the Yucatan is that of a half-baked biscuit, but the eyes are black-brown and often small, and the lank black hair suggests the Indian crossings of the 16th and 17th centuries. At the end of the jetty a lofty lich gate of wood houses Señores los Aduaneros, Messrs. the Customs House officers. But our passports are from headquarters and bear a cabinet minister's seal, so our baggage is soon passed. Over the Customs House gate might be written, bearing Dante's terrible line, "All hope of cleanliness abandon, ye who enter here. For once inside Progreso town you must do battle with tropical dust at its worst." Through the railway yard, where the sun beats down with a blistering heat on trucks, mules, and men, you make your way to the train through filthy little arcaded streets, your boots disappearing at each footstep. In the ill-smelling, garbage-littered compound, your eyes smarting in the clouds of it, you kick up. The station is a barn, the railway a 3-foot gauge. The cars are rickety, low-roofed, cane-seated, yellow wood affairs. From engine to brake van, the train is American made. There seems little to choose in comfort between the classes, but for the sake of more elbow room we plunge our 3 centavos a kilometre, the usual first-class fare all over Yucatan, a fraction less than a penny a mile. Distinctly cheap if the rolling stock were better. As the little train jolts through the outskirts of the town, ringing its bell, the dust it raises blending with the resinous smoke from the wood fire of its engine, naked yellow babies look up from their play in the dirt and scamper into shelter, while female faces peer out between the iron bars which do duty for glass windows in the one-storied high, flat-roofed houses. Northern Yucatan is as level as an Essex marsh, and the line runs through miles of country at first glance quite English, with its dense covering of small trees like nut bushes and silver birches. Nature has been niggard of soil to the whole peninsula. But perhaps it is around Progreso that you realize most that the Yucatan must be content to sow his seed in the stony ground. The sun-dried undergrowth is of cactus, stunted shrubs, and sea grasses. Here and there this breaks to give way to swamps rich in purple and white orchids and golden water plants, fair to look on as the sun touches the water between the waving rushes. But surely enough the happy breeding ground of the yellow jack mosquito. Then come fields of henequen or hemp, the green gold of Yucatan. The plants like huge green pineapples with waxy green feathers on top, enclosed within grey stone walls like those of Scotland. As we near the capital, the distance is but 25 miles. The carriages fill up, and you squeeze closer into your canned seat for two to make room for some fat Yucatan or his ill-shaped, chalk-faced, powdered dame. In the suburbs of Merida there are miles of them. The rail runs between rows of native huts, palm-leaf thatched frameworks of wood upon which red earth is plastered and then stuccoed or whitewashed. Each has its garden, evidently the despair of its owner, for dogs, pigs, and fowls dispute possession of it with tin cans and refuse. But even in these unfavourable surroundings, tropic nature beautifies with the greeny gold leaf of the banana and the heavy hanging greener crown of the coconut palm. Over all rises a strange vista. Merida might well be called the city of windmills. On each side of the train you see the horizon literally crowded with air motors for pumping water from the limestone, and you hear it whispered in a tone of pride by Yucatan to his neighbor that there are in Yucatan's capital 6,000 of these eyesores. Merida could claim another alias. The city of windmills might as appropriately be called the city of cabs. And they are curious cabs too, cabs without sides or backs or fronts, mere frameworks of light wood with leather tops and cloth curtains all round, which roll up and button or roll down and shade the fair, spectral four-wheelers as if in prehistoric times a London growler had immigrated here and propagated a species of tropical growler, all skin and bones. Dozens of these hackney phantoms await us in the station yard. The drivers in spotless loose-flying linen shifts and linen trousers, bell-bottomed over their bare brown feet, shod with sandals, their headgear wide-awakes of black or brown felt. The boxes are elaborately ornamented with brass nails, burnished to a dazzling brightness. The back seat (you must not sit too far back or you will fall out) has room for two, and in front a shelf like that in a Victoria lets down for a third passenger. There are hundreds of these cabs in Merida, and everybody uses them all the time. They are not the luxury they are in most capitals, and are quite a feature of the place. We had understood there is only one hotel in Merida. It is a libel, for there are three, and seated in the phantom car we select we bowled noiselessly over asphalted roads towards it. It was on the 6th January, 1542, that amid, one can be sure, immense bombast of trumpet blare and drum beat, the first stones were laid of the very loyal and noble city of Merida. This is what its charter, granted by His Most Catholic Majesty Philip II, called it. It is a double-barreled misnomer. Merida has no claim to loyalty, for she revolted from Spain as soon as she conveniently could, and she has never been loyal to the Republic of Mexico, of which, much against her will, the country of which she is the capital has formed part, off and on, since the beginning of the 19th century. And Merida is in no sense a noble city, never has been and never can be, but she is what perhaps is better, a clean city. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Merida thinks it comes first, and she has let the other virtue lag a very bad second in her civic race. But she has not always even been clean. 5 years back her streets were Saharas of ill-smelling dust to your boot-tops in the dry season, and sloughs of despond in the wet. No one who has not visited Yucatan can realize the Aladdin-like results of the showers of gold which have fallen upon this Danae land as a result of her stable product, henequen. But directly you enter one of the phantom cabs you come under the spell of a city which is magically perfect, as unlike any other Spanish-American town as is possible. The millionaire henequen growers are so rich that they really do not know what to do with their money, and so it came about that the ex-governor, Señor Molina, conceived the idea of reupholstering Merida till its founders would never recognize their handiwork. The shape of the city is much what it was planned on a vast chessboard system, all the streets running at right angles and parallel to one another, forming 9 square miles of squat stone-built houses, almost all one-storied, their long windows heavily barred instead of glazed. But just as carpet makes a room, Señor Molina saw that what Merida needed was paving, and so he proceeded to get an estimate from a French asphalt company. The amount was so huge that his brother millionaires on the council only smiled sickly smiles of incredulity when he suggested voluntary contributions. But if their ill-gotten dollars would not come out of their pockets by fair means, the governor determined that they should buy foul. At least, that was the adjective which these much oppressed Croesuses probably applied to his methods, and he taxed every bale of henequen loaded at Progreso. In this way he raised a gigantic sum for the beautifying of the capital, part of which, no less than 30 million Mexican dollars, 3 million sterling, was spent in paving the streets. It took between 2 and 3 years, and the result is perfection. From north to south, from east to west, side streets and main streets, for the full 3 miles width of the city, the surface is as smooth as glass, as clean as marble. Never was there such paving, and never will there probably ever be again, for there is no parallel to the circumstances of unforeseen wealth which has come to Yucatan's capital. We had been favorably impressed by the cleanliness of the Yucatan crowds at Progreso, and as we moved easily and without a vibration down street after street of well-matched and well-built houses, we rubbed our eyes and wondered whether we were in a land where it was always washing day, for the people on the sidewalks, the people in the passing carriages, the police at the corners in their trim Holland uniforms, the children playing at the pavement edge, the tradesmen at their shop doors, and the boys and girls in their neat linens returning from school were so spotless as to beggar all description. But in the midst of our amazement we reached our hotel, a massive 3-storied building in 2 squares, neatly floored with tiles, roofless, wide flights of stone steps leading up to galleries from which was access to the bedrooms. stone-floored, very high-ceilinged, opening through wooden sunblinds onto small balconies. We were very tired with our journey, and the coolness of our rooms and the brightness of the city had such a lulling effect that we were almost persuaded that we had reached Utopia. There was nothing disquieting in our rooms from the insect point of view, except a line of harmless-looking small black ants which were taking an afternoon walk along the tiles at the corner, and the fact that the small iron bedsteads were enveloped in mosquito nets. We had evidently reached Utopia. The air was balmy as we composed ourselves to sleep that night, and there was not even a mosquito in our nets. Shortly before dawn the next morning, Sunday, we were roused from a dreamless sleep by a din so terrific that to our half-sleeping wits it converted itself into a giant tattoo beat on cracked tea-trays. We started up. Boom, boom. A pause. Poom, poom. The last was a ragged-edged sound, as flat as stale soda water, as lifeless as Queen Anne. Then came a shrill noise, such as might be produced by a violent meeting between a butcher's steel and the treble octave of a cottage grand. Then pum-pum again, and then a noise as if the blacksmith of Spreading Chestnut Tree fame had gone suicidally mad, and had spent his dying fury and the full force of the muscles of his brawny arms in one fell blow on his anvil. Something must be wrong. We could not patiently bear this. Perhaps it was a Utopian form of fire alarm, and we were doomed to cremation in our mosquito netting unless we roused ourselves. At this moment our door burst open, and a fellow traveller from Vera Cruz, in purple silk pajamas, his hair on end, a wild look in his eyes, cried out, "Do you hear those awful bells?" Bells, surely. We rubbed our eyes and gazed open-mouthed at him. Surely they weren't bells. What superhuman intelligence was this he showed at such an early hour? We listened. Yes, they were. That anvil note again, meant for bells. Bells as cracked as any March hare. The cathedral bells, too, pounding their awful tea-tray notes right across the plaza into our windows. We had never heard such bells. Nobody outside Yucatan ever has. It was bedlam in the belfry, and with our fingers in our ears we walked on to the balcony to see how the Utopian knights were bearing them. Merida was up, and did not seem to mind the bells a bit. Perhaps they are an acquired taste. The people in the streets seemed not to notice the noise, and there was as much crowd as there was din. This bell scandal was evidently the rift within the Utopian lute, and presently, thank heaven, the music was dumb, and we were able to watch in peace from our point of vantage the life of the awakening city. It was a picturesque scene. The street was alight with bright colors and pretty faces. The women of Merida were going to early mass. Here were a knot of pale-faced maidens in muslins, rainbow-hued in their variety, pale blue, rose pink, saffron, heliotrope, white or green, hatless, their raven-black hair decked with flowers, their service books clasped in small hands. These were the upper middle class femininity of the city. The wealthiest women never walked at all. But a prettier picture still were the mestizas, half-castes, the name given by the wealthier Yucatecans to their lower sisters, the beauties of the people, whose soft skins were colored a sweet brown by their Indian blood. Their dress was a long, spotlessly white, softly flowing shift of linen, bordered at neck and hem with embroidery, cut open low round the neck, and with no sleeves, and exposing their bare feet and ankles. It was a costume which framed their charms in quite a perfect style. And with all these mingled the Indian women and girls, their complexions a warm reddish brown, their black hair draped in cotton wraps of blue or brown, green or pink, thrown sari fashion round the head and falling over the shoulders, their bare feet innocent of shoe tortures, small and dainty, if a little broad. There were few men and boys about, but those looked cleaner than ever, spotless in their linens, with felt hats or panamas, the laddies in their tight linen knickerbockers, with their plump bare brown legs, looking the picture of boyish health. As the hour wore on, Indian dames passed on their way homeward from the early market, balancing on their heads large flat baskets filled with oranges, bananas, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, eggs, large slices of salmon-fleshed melons dotted with black seeds, small pineapples, lemons, limes, green and red peppers, and garlic. And often in the midst of this market medley sat a small hen or two, as contentedly as if they were brooding over a sitting of eggs. A wealthy Yucatecan who has travelled much is credited with saying, "After Merida, give me Paris." There is really much to be said for his patriotic view. Merida is a beautiful city. The vista down the long street from our balcony, with the gay colors of the girls' dresses, the snowy whiteness of the men's clothes, and the smart brass-decked skeleton cabs, the soft yellow of the houses. All houses in Merida are by order painted yellow to prevent the unpleasant sun glare which white walls would mean. Here and there a waving crown of green peeping over the housetops from some garden patio made a right pleasant picture against the deep blue of the cloudless sky. But Merida owes none of her undoubted beauty to her buildings. There are but three worth mention, and this not from any architectural merits, but solely because of their historical interest. These are the cathedral, the bishop's palace, and the house of Francisco de Montejo, conqueror of Yucatan. They are all in the plaza. The cathedral is a gaunt pile of plastered mediocrity, with naked facade flanked by two turreted towers, lair of the accursed bells which had marred the tropic beauty of the morning. It was completed in 1598, and cost some 60,000, equivalent to-day to perhaps $250,000. Within there is little worth seeing except the 12 immense columns which support the roof. The hangings and drapings are as tawdry as is the much begilded altar. The pulpit is dusty, dirty, and old, and is reached by wooden steps, literally rotten and in holes. But if there is nothing worth seeing, there is something which is very astonishing. On each pillar is hung a notice which reads, "Servants no escupir en el pavimento de este templo." You are requested not to spit on the floor of this church. And on the flooring of the plan, yellow wood seats, and all along each aisle at the entrance to the pews are spittoons. Yes, it sounds incredible, but they are there. Right up to the altar rails a vista of earthenware abominations, such as disfigure the sanded quaintness of the bar parlour of an old village inn. In a later chapter on Yucatan manners we shall have more to say of the habit thus officially countenanced by the Church. That perspective of spittoons from door to altar rail in Merida Cathedral was probably no parallel in any country. The bishop's palace adjoins the cathedral and bears the date 1757. It is so hideous in its flat stuccoed plainness that it is really wonderful that even the Yucatecans do not rebel and raze it to the ground. Beneath it entrance is obtained by a large double wooden doorway to a vestibule opening into the bishop's garden, which forms a lady chapel where on a trestle such as those upon which the coconut and sweetstuff men do their roaring trades on bank holidays at Hampstead, an iron tray covered with small spikes is provided for the faithful to stick a tallow dip, value 1 centavo, a farthing, in front of a plaster image of the Virgin. The house of Montejo, now the property of one of the many branches of the Peon family, the wealthiest of all Yucatecans, bears the date 1541, and is thus the oldest building in Merida. The facade is fine, and the doorway is a typically Spanish representation of militarism, plus bigotry. 2 knights armed capepa being engaged in the congenial occupation of trampling underfoot 2 Indians who take it lying down, as alas, their descendants are still doing. Life in Merida is as artificial as, indeed more artificial than, that of Mexico City. The latter, owing, as we have said, our fashions and her veneer of civilization to Paris and New York, is assisted by her size in still being much herself. Not so Merida. No self-respecting Yucatecan wants to be himself. All of them are pathetically striving all the time after a culture which they do not understand, and which fits them as ill as his dress suit fits the hired butler at a suburban dance. Scratch the Russian and you find the Tartar. Most Yucatecans are the vulgarest of parvenus, and by the least scratching you find the savage. They are ashamed of their Indian past, and by an exaggerated class arrogance they try to widen the gulf between themselves and the Indians. As the purse-proud woman thinks she will be mistaken for a lady if she calls every servant a slut, they love to emphasize their superior wealth by dubbing their lower brothers and sisters mestizos and mestizas. The truth, Yucatecans form but one class, and they are all mestizos. There are few pure Indians in the capital, and those are the domestic servants of the wealthy families. You do not see the great contrast of wealth so marked in Mexico City. The whole town has an air of prosperity, and it is not an air merely, it is a fact. During the past 20 years the group of large henequen growers, about a score, have divided among themselves, as a result of this green gold, no less than 800,000,000 Mexican dollars, and this vast sum has percolated through the whole place. Merida is a Monte Carlo for extravagance and extortion. There is no social standard but pound, shilling, pence. A man is or is not great socially in proportion to his banking account. Nowhere in the world, probably, is money so absolutely God as here. We shall show later what moral effect this fact has had upon the citizens, and through them upon the whole of so-called civilized Yucatan. Corruption and venality are rampant. Few races have stamina enough to resist the corroding influences of sudden wealth. The silver mines of Mexico prove the knell of Spanish imperial greatness. Lord Beaconsfield said once, "Only a great man can stand power." In Yucatan, wealth is power, the only power, and the Yucatecans stand it very badly. In this city of mushroom millionaires, everything is naturally very dear. Food is practically all imported. We had been told that at our hotel it was impossible to get a square meal for less than $5, 10 shillings. It was not quite so bad as that, but for half that sum it is true enough you could only get just such a snack as an honestly hungry Briton would regard as a wholly inadequate quick lunch talk business while you eat style of meal. Few of the Yucatecans eat out of their own houses, and thus restaurants, at any rate of the cleanly and better class, are few and far between. Those which do exist are literally dens of robbers. The traveller in Yucatan, as indeed in all Mexico, has to learn what to a Briton accustomed to more or less trust his fellow man is a very unpleasant lesson, namely, that you can trust no one. The only safety on ordering a meal is to first drive a bargain. You must know down to the smallest roll or condiment what your repast is going to cost you. No Merida hotels or restaurants ever attach prices to their menus. They know a trick worth two of that. Each restaurateur is a gastronomic Procustus who cuts his prices according to the cut of his customers. An article served at 25 centavos to one dinner will at the next table boom to 50 at the discretion of the subtle waiter. It is very hard to always remember to do this unpleasant bargaining before you take your place at a table, but you are literally lost if you do not. On this glorious Sunday morning we were successfully caught in a place where they charged 4 shillings for 3 glasses of lemonade and 3 or 4 fly-blown cakes. The cakes you would get anywhere for a penny, and lemons could be brought in the street outside at 6 a penny. The streets of Merida are full of life and bustle, the cleanliest of bustle. Even the blind beggars (blindness is rather common) who crouch against the walls with their plaintive cry of "Pobre ciego" are as neat as a new pin. Smartly varnished, mule-drawn tram cars tinkle their way to and from the suburbs. Outside the railings of the cathedral sit all day a line of Indian women in front of baskets filled with cakes, flattish, appetizing looking, sometimes as much as 2 or 3 feet across. Under the arcades of the municipal palace, which forms the north side of the plaza, is a motley scene of life. Here are tiny cigar booths, small drinking counters, where are dispensed hour after hour to thirsty crowds refrescos, drinks of squashed fruits, the deliciously sweet guanabana, limes, coconut water, pineapple, or what not, and iced waters, withered beldams, with baskets of sweets, lottery ticket sellers, and itinerant booksellers, while at the small round tables set in the doorways the Yucatecan loafers drink coffee or the native spirits, and from within the shaded rooms is heard the eternal click click of billiard balls. Billiards, the French game without pockets, is a mania in Yucatan. As the young Yucatecans crowd round the green tables, the edges of the arcaded pavements are occupied by large chairs on daisies. Lolling in the chair, the Yucatecan lad who will polish your boots for 15 centavos. The Yucatecan jeunesse dorée are dandies if nothing else, and this must be the reason why there are more boot blacks to the square mile in Merida than in any capital we wot of. But the lordly boot black who waits for you to come to him is not half as picturesque a figure as the peripatetic boot boy. All day long these little roguish-eyed rascals wander round the plaza, carrying their boot boxes and begging you to let them kneel in front of you and make your boots like looking glasses. The boys are all so pretty and have got such winning smiles that you are insanely inclined to have your boots blacked every quarter of an hour. Joking apart, boot blacking has been reduced to a science in Merida, and the operators put out of joint the noses of the London Boot Brigade. Time was when Merida was far more picturesque than she is today. In the old city, when few of the citizens were grand at reading, streets were, as indeed they were once in London, known by their signs. Thus at one corner there was a wooden image of a flamingo. This was Flamingo Street. Another was the Street of the Old Woman, the corner being decorated with an effigy highly coloured of a bespectacled dame. There was a Tapir Street adorned with a representation of that queer pig deer which still haunts the swampy forests of southern Yucatan and Chiapas, a Crane Street, and so on. But all this is a thing of the past. America has invaded Yucatan, even to her street naming, and Merida, with her 48th and 63rd streets, with the street numbers reduplicated on the corners, thus 503, 62nd Street, 503, is as maddening and intricate as New York. Only one of the old signs remains, that of the elephant. As you cross the plaza towards the market, it is difficult to picture what the old city must have been like when roads were not roads, and the plaza, now a wonderfully kept square of grass, flowers, and stone, was a mangy patch of leprous grass dotted with trees to which were tied mules which had brought in produce from the country. But the alterations in Merida are surface alterations. The only wonder is that the city is as healthy as it is, for there is no attempt at any general sewerage system, no main drains, and every householder is a law unto himself on this vital question. Each hot season there are outbreaks, sometimes very serious, of yellow fever, but the city is a healthy city. There is no doubt about it. There is a general avoidance of well water for drinking purposes, and as a substitute the most elaborate arrangements are made for storing every drop of rain water during the wet season. This is done by every house of any size having enormous cemented tanks under their patios. The water pipes from the roofs connecting with them, thus the two huge quadrangles of our hotel, were nothing but gigantic reservoirs tiled over. The rainy season practically never fails Yucatan, and though not as regular in its advent as the Indian monsoon, keeps up year by year its average of supply. Surface refuse is dealt with summarily by the most picturesque set of road sweepers imaginable. Neatly uniformed in white drill or brown holland, they wear pith helmets adorned with metal badges bearing their number, and look like soldiers. In front of them they push by means of a long handle a tin shovel, some 4 feet long, which runs on neat little wheels. These men are everywhere, and take very good care that garbage is nowhere. The water carts, too, are worth a mention. Gigantic wooden hogsheads, painted in yellow stripes. These generally work at night, and take up their supply from huge water taps which jut out from the walls of buildings, and upon which the men tie brown holland piping in the most primitive fashion to fill their carts. The evenings at Merida are the gayest times, for then all folks, rich and poor, come out to spend the cool hours in the plaza. There is very little twilight ever in the tropics, and as soon as the sun is down and it is dusk enough, the wealthy Yucatecans have a queer habit of sitting in rocking chairs outside their houses. A whole group of ladies will thus take the air in front of the huge doorways of the biggest houses, surrounded by 2 or 3 cavaliers. Later on the carriages are ordered, and sleepy-eyed beauties drive round and round the plaza in the dark, apparently enjoying this rather queer form of carriage exercise. In the centre of the plaza itself the town band assembles, and this is a signal for a nightly promenade of the humbler Meridians. Nothing can be more picturesque or typical. The seats are filled for the most part with the older people, fat old men, linen suited and besandaled, armed generally with an incongruous, ill-rolled umbrella, smoke and doze beside them solid-looking Yucatecan matrons with gold chains round their necks from which hang gold coins and a metal or ivory crucifix. At their feet a baby or two, dressed in the shortest of shifts, play about. But young Merida walks. Yet here again there is something which attracts the English eye, for there is a complete separation of the sexes. The girls walk together in twos, threes, and fours one way, and the young dandies in their spotless white linen bell-bottomed trousers, belted with ornamental belts over which are hung blue and white striped cloths reaching to their knees like butchers' aprons, put on sideways, gaudily coloured silk cotton vests and other these white linen coats, walk the other. All the youths have a pretty habit of going hand in hand, or with arms round each other's necks. They are there to see the girls, and in the hope that the girls will see them. But the curious thing is that you never see them look at one another. The groups of chatting youths and maidens pass and repass one another round and round under the trees, in and out of the paths. Watch as hard as you like, you will never see an ogling glance or catch a hint of that coarse chaff which is inseparable from such a congregating of lower class youth of both sexes in a city like London. It really is quite extraordinary, the naivete of it all, the determined way in which the external sex problem seems tabooed here. We sat for hours watching the orderly crowds, and never once did we see a girl stop in her walk to speak to a man, or any youth attempt to speak or to walk with a maid. It was decorum in excelsis. It reminded one of the famous description of Boston as a place where respectability stalks unchecked. But respectability is usually perilously near being a synonym for mawkish dullness. Here it was not so. You had absolute decorum. There was no suspicion of noisy horse play or hooliganism. There was not the slightest need for a policeman. As a matter of fact, none appeared during the whole evening to keep order, and yet the crowd was as perfect a specimen of the brightest popular life any city could show. They had all come out to enjoy themselves, and they enjoyed themselves like children, with a simple, unaffected gaiety which was very infectious. With all their faults, the Yucatecans have the saving grace of good temper, not from a geniality of disposition so much as from a physical apathy which makes them reluctant to the effort which losing one's temper involves. And this merry, laughing crowd in the plaza, the simple, unadorned beauty of the dark-eyed lasses, the knots of handsome youths armed length, the plum babies contentedly playing in between the legs of the strollers, the old people dozing in the shady seats, and the mellow light from a huge electric strand dappling with a moon-like radiance, the exquisitely cleanly pathways made such a picture of pleasant contentment as was quite utopian. In the darkened roadways the wealthier beauties of Merida drove round and round the plaza like bats circling round a lamp. But though there were many of them whose lascivious beauty would have made most men forswear their most cherished convictions, our hearts were in the plaza with the chattering, happy crowd, and we were quite sorry when the band, which, with an extraordinary display of energy, had played 4 tunes in 2 hours, struck work and the folks dispersed. End of Section 6. Recording by John Smith.